Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, the podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con, our sponsor for this podcast. KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con conferences gather adopters and technologists to further the education and advancement of cloud native computing. The vendor-neutral events feature domain experts and key maintainers behind popular projects like Kubernetes, Prometheus, gRPC, Envoy, Open Tracing, and more. KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con is a conference series under the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which in itself is a project of the Linux Foundation. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack. Here in Copenhagen, the late afternoon with the sun shining in, so I decided to put on the brim of my hat. But we are here talking about security topics that relate to Kubernetes. In particular, I'm interested in hearing about the TUF Project from Justin Cappos, who's an associate professor of computer science and engineering at NYU. And we're also joined by Liz Rice, technology evangelist at Aqua Security and co-chair of the Kubernetes plus Cloud Native Con conference. My question is about these new projects that are coming in, and we're seeing a number of them emerge. Justin, you're behind TUF. Perhaps you could tell us about it. It's not brand new, actually. It's been around for a while.
Yeah, the TUF project itself was started back in 2008, 2009, and we had a pretty long history of going and doing a lot of work with folks at the Tor project and other different large software distributions groups that did this, but had concerns about maybe nation-state actors stepping in and doing things. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, the Docker community came together and built a really nice implementation of TUF Notary. And as of about 6 months ago, both the Docker implementation, which is the cloud-focused implementation of TUF, and the TUF spec itself became CNCF Projects.
Great. And so tell us a little bit more about TUF and its and how it relates to Notary.
Sure. So TUF is like the rules about how something like Notary needs to behave. Notary is a very cloud-focused implementation of TUF that does a lot to integrate well into the sort of use cases that the cloud has. TUF itself is a software updater spec that's specifically designed with the idea that your infrastructure will be compromised at some point, and that you need to be able to be resilient to those compromises, be able to recover from them securely, be able to recover from keys being lost or stolen or used by malicious parties. And TUF is really a solution that has had revocation as a first-class primary concern from the very beginning, which is very atypical for security systems.
Liz, what does the TUF project symbolize to you, kind of what we're seeing in Kubernetes overall with security?
So I think, TUF is really about, and correct me if I'm wrong, so this will be my understanding of it, but I think TUF is really about the provenance of a piece of software. So you have a container image. Did it get built by the person who should be building it? Yeah. If you've got a container image in a registry, somewhere between the registry and it running on your deployment, did anybody tamper with it at any stage? So I think that's really what the TUF project is protecting you against.
We're much more the latter of once you've gone and decided that you want to bless the software and get it out, how can we make sure it doesn't get tampered with, that you're not fed an outdated version or doing other things? But absolutely, yes.
So with TUF and Rotary, what are some of the other, I'd like to kind of go through some of the other projects that we're seeing emerge in Kubernetes, in the ecosystem. How do you classify them, first of all? The security projects. How do you think about them in that context? Because there may be projects related to identity, for example, that we're seeing, right? So I'm just curious on how you think about them from a hierarchical.
My personal opinion at the moment is that there are some really interesting but quite separate security projects we've seen Spiffy, which is about identity. It's a really valuable part of the puzzle, so that workloads can identify each other. A service can connect to another service and know that it really is that service. There's the open policy agent, which is just come in.
Which is a lightweight policy.
I'm, intrigued to find out more about that because it's a general purpose way of describing policies. Are you allowed to run this image? Is this service allowed to contact that service? It's pretty in the same kind of sphere as some of the things that Aqua do. So I'm definitely going to be looking into that more. But I think they're quite disparate bits of the security puzzle. Security is a huge thing. We'll probably see more projects. I'm speculating, but I'm sure there will be more projects. I'm sure there will be more security-related initiatives.
So when you're thinking about security kind of in this new world, right? I mean, you've been studying security for a while. You studied at NYU. You research it quite a bit, and Kubernetes provides much more exposure, really, doesn't it? I mean, you got to be very careful because it's just like there's so many services running across. It's like that hive that we were talking about before. But it's also kind of it's becoming a very kind of significant infrastructure component. Where, for example, we're hearing things today about like operators, right? Where you're going to be able to almost treat that as like a control plane, right? For your application. So there's tremendous complexity out there. As an academician, how do you view that? How do you view Kubernetes and and what we're seeing come out of it in terms of, and how does that kind of manifests itself as a kind of a research center for security and how it's practiced?
Yeah, I think you put it a very nice way, that it really does open up a lot of research opportunities, or really opportunities for security folks to step in and try to help out. So for myself personally, I've actually been working with some folks on the Spiffy team and conducting a security audit of it and helping them to try to go and get solid, defensible security guarantees throughout their system and have a meaningful understanding of what it really means inside of Spiffy when something goes wrong. If an attacker gets into this, to an agent, like, what does this actually mean? What can they do? Can they only do things that are local to that specific node, or do they get any privileges outside of that? Yes, and I absolutely agree with you that it's unfortunately a little like, you don't ever want to hear this from a security person, but it's like being a kid in a candy store. There's so much you could go and play with and find out ways to break. But it makes sense because the space is all moving so quickly. And one of the nice things about the CNCF is it's so supportive of things like security, where in fact they are actually paying for a security audit of TUF and Notary, and I'm quite sure that Spiffy and other projects will be soon to follow.
We actually saw Core DNS getting its security audit and it uncovering a significant issue, a cache DNS cache poisoning issue. They've fixed it. There's a patch for that. But that kind of audit that the CNCF is enabling is really turning out to be worthwhile.
Does Kubernetes need a security audit in itself? I mean, how would you even conduct that?
I was going to deflect to you, Liz.
I've never done a security audit, so I don't really know whether.
Okay. All right. So I can talk a bit more about that. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to do an audit, and the time and effort it does increases dramatically with the size and complexity of what you're doing and what it is you're looking at. So I imagine that there have been, I'm speaking without actually knowing, but I imagine that there have been security audits by various folks at different levels and different implementations of Kubernetes. For the Kubernetes ecosystem as a whole, which includes all the sorts of things that get used and called and so on, then what the CNCF and others are trying to do is to target those individual essential components, which is one of the reasons why I think they were so excited to bring TUF in, because even before it came into the CNCF, we'd had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 different security audits of different components that were built using TUF or the TUF spec itself. And so when they added it, it was, I think, it and Notary and part of this was viewed as a way to help, say the security overall. Now we can take this piece of you going and actually getting your container on your system, and we can say, yes, darn it, this should really be secure.
Right. So, what are the research areas that are interesting to you, Liz? What are some of the research topics? I mean, we're not going to do a security audit on Kubernetes. It just seems like kind of almost like crazy making. Like, how would you even accomplish that?
I think that in some ways, the way that we decompose architecture, software,
right,
business software, whatever, we're decomposing software into services, into microservices. That actually gives us some interesting kind of advantages in security terms, rather than trying to secure this massive, great monolith that your bank or your retailer is trying to deploy. They can be looking at securing individual services, individual microservices, where it's much, much more straightforward to reason about, what an individual microservice should be allowed to do. So we, at Aqua have tools around runtime protection, and you can look at a profile and make sense of it, because this particular microservice should only run these particular executables and nothing else, or it should only run as these user IDs and nothing else. It's a manageable profile, where in a traditional architecture that is really a headache-inducing proposition.
Right.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, though, is that as you split things up, you have to worry a lot more about cross, like secondary effects of actions.
Yes.
So it's both better because it's easier to audit the individual thing, but then your whole set of audits you've done across components has to almost be correlated together to understand this. And this is something that, as we've been doing the SPIFFE audit, we've seen quite a lot of this, where we noticed that, okay, well, yes, there could be a vulnerability here, but if you exploit that vulnerability here, you can use it to exploit a vulnerability there and then hop to there. And so this vulnerability that didn't seem so bad in the first place maybe actually it would be more impactful. And let me just be clear, by the way, we're not talking about a specific vulnerability in like the Spire implementation for SPIFFE or the actual code, but looking at the risk profile of if someone is able to find a type of vulnerability in this, what would they be able to accomplish with it, if that makes sense.
And that's an increasing complexity then with the kind of just the way Kubernetes is architected, because everything is connected in some respects, right? There's always, there's so much, there's so many microservices that are just bouncing around. It's like, that infrastructure is just massively complex.
Yeah, software is inherently
massively
become a complex thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody is ever going to say any piece of software is, known to be exploit free. Things get uncovered all the time. Vulnerabilities get discovered all the time. So part of it is, it's about not assuming that things are secure, assuming that vulnerabilities will happen, but then if they do, how can you contain the blast radius?
The blast radius, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. That's such a fundamental concept that's missed in so many other domains that Liz brings up. But yeah, assume things will be compromised, and do your best to make that not happen, but don't put all your eggs in one basket and let a single compromise somewhere compromise everything in your infrastructure.
But that must speak to then the usefulness of that just speaks to kind of one of the inherent aspects of Kubernetes, though, is its resiliency, isn't it? That's a core aspect of it. Does that, with that kind of resiliency in mind, then, what are the different security kind of concerns that do surface out of that you think are going to be more apparent over the next 3 to 6 months?
Well, some of the issues that are being addressed and that there are solutions to, which are things like secret management and identity management, and trying to automate away as much of the security infrastructure as is possible, so that you end up with things like mutual TLS authentication between any components that talk. You have all sorts of different vendors are providing good solutions to do secret storage and management, but anything like this that provides layers and abstractions and sort of both provides you with strong security, yet also hides it from you in this distributed microservice sense. This is, I think, extraordinarily valuable, and getting to the point where, you know, it's almost hard for you to deploy without having that is really a place where I'd like to see us be, which is really a nice thing that Notary has done in at least some of their some of the ways that TUF gets used is that you don't even know that this is happening.
Yeah.
And so baking it in that way throughout the infrastructure in all these important different ways would be very valuable.
Right. Right. So in terms of future projects that that you see coming down, see emerging around different subject matter, what are some of the kind of areas that you're seeing that you could see projects emerging? So we see, like, for example, Spiffy, right, for identity. Are there other projects that, are there other areas that need to be looked at more closely, or are there open source projects that are starting to emerge?
I'm thinking, Alexis Richardson would be the best person to answer that question.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a couple I can name. So I do think OPA, Open Policy Architecture, despite not I am not deeply involved with the project. I've not taken a deep look at it, but the kind of powers and things that it enables, I can very much see why it was taken in as a sandbox project in the CNCF, and I'm really interested to see how it develops and how it grows and what happens with the community around it. There are also a lot of different projects that are looking at things related to supply chain security and managing things like through the CI/CD process and through from version control all the way down to the end till you ship the software.
This is the kind of Grafeus and in Toto.
Yeah. So Grafeus and Toto and a handful of other projects are starting to look at those sorts of areas, and I think this is increasingly going to be a focus where people want to know, like, where did my software come from? Are there, did somebody malicious go and stick something in there, or am I maybe just using an old version of a library that has known CVEs? Those are just immensely important if you're supposed to be trusting the software.
I'm also thinking of one project in particular that I heard you guys mentioning before, and I saw it on your blog, is Grafeus, right? Mm-hmm. Where is that right now? Where's the status of Grafeus at the moment?
It has some areas that are a work in progress. I think Google is internally using some aspects of it, as I understand it. There's definitely a dedicated team that's doing a lot of work, and there's a lot of very positive activity around it. They're working to try to define detailed schemas that will make it very seamless integration into a lot of cloud environments. And that's a truly Herculean task. There's a lot that has to be done with data formats and schemas and stuff, and I think if they pull it off, they're going to have a tremendously exciting offering.
What makes it so exciting?
Well, it will be it'll be like on Rails. Like, basically you'll have it'll be architected in a way that people who want to use it have a very seamless and easy experience with doing so.
Right.
And one of the things that tends to happen in these places is that usability for the actual DevOps people that maybe don't focus so much on security does become key, and this can be a very valuable thing to see in terms of adoption and use, which is ultimately the metric. I mean, you can make something as awesome or secure or whatever as it is as you want, and if people can't use it or won't use it, then you've wasted your time.
Very true. Mm-hmm. Very true.
Well, the conference, is it's hard to believe, but it's more than half over for sure, and we're coming into Friday. What are some of the more interesting kind of discussions you've had, presentations you've seen that relate to security that have you thinking about your work and your research going forward from here?
Well, one thing that I saw that was very interesting was the announcement by Google about gvisor. I think there's actually a tremendous amount of potential, and we, like my research group, has actually been working for quite a while on doing isolation at a performance, or even at a process, or even a finer grain than a process level. And it's very interesting to see Google come out with an offering in this, because most of what we had seen, there had been some open source discussion about things and some projects that had gotten a little bit of press, but it's interesting to see a company kind of say, yeah, we are going to put a team and we're going to try to build something out that's real. So I think that can be a very, very positive and very exciting thing, not just from a security standpoint, but could be a very positive thing from performance in a lot of other ways if they push in the right direction.
Liz, what are some of the things that you think you'll be ruminating about as you leave the conference halls here in Copenhagen?
There's going to be so much for me to catch up on as well. So I've had, the privilege of being involved in getting keynotes together, and that's been really good fun. And I think seeing some of the lessons that people have learned, as end users, I hope that those stories are going to be really valuable to, to other people at the conference and to potential, people coming on board. This whole kind of early majority of enterprises that are kind of coming into the cloud
the early
world.
Majority. Yeah.
There's a whole lot of things to learn from that. But in terms of like what's been happening with the SIGs and the all the kind of technical discussions that go on, I've got so much to catch up on.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you. Thank you both for taking the time. Liz, Justin, really appreciate it. Love to, have you back in here about your research, and Liz is always on, is always on the security story. So, thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great. A huge thank you to KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con, our sponsor for this podcast. KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con conferences gather adopters and technologists to further the education and advancement of cloud native computing. The vendor-neutral events feature domain experts and key maintainers behind popular projects like Kubernetes, Prometheus, gRPC, Envoy, Open Tracing, and more. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Bakers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.